and family, welcome back to our webinar. It's me, Layla Miktiva, and today we're going to be talking about media business models. For this episode, we invited a special guest from Toronto, Canada, Anita Li. She is a journalist, media entrepreneur, educator, and consultant. Hi, Anita. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's amazing to see you. It's been actually 2 months, I think, since we last saw each other. I saw your actually talk on at International Journalism Festival, and I was inspired. And after that talk, I actually came to Anita and I said, "Hey, would you want to do a webinar with us? We're this nonprofit magazine, and if you would want to do it, that would be amazing." And you were so kind to accept that and to come here and give us this talk. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm so happy to be here. I'm so glad to be talking to all of you. So again, my name is Anita Li, and I am the publisher, CEO, and founder, as well as the editor-in-chief of a hyperlocal independent news outlet called The Green Line, which is all about investigating the way we live to help young Torontonians survive and thrive in a rapidly changing city. So as you can tell from that, I'm a journalist based in Toronto, Canada. And I do a lot of different things. So in addition to being a publisher, which is my main role, I also teach journalism innovation in New York City as well as here in Toronto. And then I also coach and consult through my consultancy, which is called The Other Wave. And The Other Wave is also the name of my newsletter, which is all about challenging the status quo in Canadian media. And it focuses a lot on journalism innovation across North America. So I know that everyone here is really interested in my entrepreneurship journey, and it's quite an interesting journey. So feel free to ask me any questions after I'm done my presentation. But for now, what I'd love to do is talk to you a bit about the Green Line, just how it came to be, and then also what it's all about. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen now. And you guys should be able to see, I'm going to make this a slideshow, and you should be able to see the slide deck. So let me know if that doesn't come up.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
So this is the presentation. And once I click through, a video is going to come up, and I'm just going to share that really quickly because it gives a really good sense of what the Green Line's about. Okay, so that's a quick little video all about the Green Line. This is our tagline. So our tagline is redefining Toronto through the way we live. And I really wanted to create an outlet that connects to this idea of media as a pillar of democracy. So we all know that democracies around the world are kind of faltering, which is very concerning. And so the idea behind the Green Line is that we're encouraging our readers and our audience members to take action on the issues that matter to them. So rather than just kind of passively consuming the news, we want them to take action and be engaged in their communities. And so by basically through the way we live, we're going to be able to change or redefine Toronto as we see it. And so that's just the idea behind the tagline. And so the problem that we're addressing is, during the pandemic, a lot of inequity and a lot of systemic problems have been laid bare. They've been really kind of emerged and become more obvious during the pandemic, right? So young people and especially and also underserved communities have been really impacted by this. So the problem that we're addressing is that in today's world, pathways to what we considered a good life or successful life are rockier or simply don't exist anymore. So young people like Gen Zs and millennials are having a really hard time navigating life while we're in this kind of post-lockdown phase as we live with COVID. And so that's why the Green Line is aiming to help them survive and thrive in this city that's changing really quickly. So the solution that we're providing is that by investigating the way we live, the Green Line gets to the root of the issues that impact Torontonians the most. And we also collaborate with journalists and creators from the communities that we serve through our journalism to report on local solutions that target the sources rather than the symptoms of the biggest problems facing our city. So we focus a lot on solutions journalism. And for those of you who are not familiar with solutions journalism, it's not advocacy, it's not activism, but it's really about surfacing and reporting on existing solutions to problems. And it's a lot more hopeful, and it's a lot more helpful as well, hopeful and helpful, because if you're empowered and you see a particular pathway forward, you might say, I'm going to give it a shot, or you might feel motivated to create your own solution to a particular problem in your community. So we have 3 main verticals and then events. The main vertical is lifestyle, and it's not lifestyle like, beauty products or what to do with your hair. It's really about genuinely realistic lifestyle, not aspirational lifestyle. So things about housing, mental health, about housing affordability, for example, just things that have to do with our daily lives, especially as young people. Then we also have news, which is basically the Green Line's take on a major Toronto story of the day, or it's a very community-driven approach to news gathering where we source story ideas from the community members that we serve. And then we also have a comedy vertical. Obviously, that's not journalism, but a lot of the stuff that we do on our TikTok really touches on some of those issues that impacts the lives of young people and underserved communities in Toronto. Mm-hmm. And it's a way to kind of build audience and a way to kind of attract them into these kind of more headier or stressful stories, because people really need to have an initial point of connection, and comedy can really bring people together and engage them. And so that's the idea behind that. Mm-hmm. These are our main audiences that we serve. So on the left-hand side, you'll see action-oriented young urbanites. And that really just means young people, Gen Zs and millennials in Toronto. In our city, we're, close to 50% people of color. We are quite diverse as a city. We're also a city of immigrants. So especially younger generations are more diverse than older generations, and they're looking for ways to take action on issues that matter to them. So I don't need to tell your audience, which is youth, that we are the driving force behind a lot of social movements over the last decade or so. So everything from Me Too to the climate march, like Fridays for Future, to Indigenous rights marches, Black Lives Matter. A lot of these things have been driven by young people, and I wanted to tap into that energy. The second audience are underserved Torontonians. So these are people who live, work, and play in very highly populated areas of Toronto, including my hometown of Scarborough, which is a suburb. I grew up middle class, but in a very working class area. And it was quite under-resourced as a result. So we didn't have access to a lot of things where I grew up. And then also in this category, I include newcomers to Toronto. So those are new immigrants, refugees, and also people who I consider dual citizens. Mm-hmm. That basically means people with hyphenated identities. So I don't know if you guys relate to this, but I'm born and raised in Canada, but my parents are from Hong Kong. So there's like kind of 2 cultures that I navigate when I was growing up, especially. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, it's culture vultures. So Toronto is a really big city. It's becoming more and more, popular to discuss in the news worldwide. So I know that there's an audience outside of the local audiences, and those are basically young English speakers based in urban centers around the world who are interested in Toronto's arts and culture scene. So those are the audiences. I won't get into this too much, but we've gotten a lot of really great early traction. For those of you who don't know, we launched our website, thegreenline.to, this past April. So just like honestly 2 months ago, 3 months ago. And we launched, we started publishing stories on our Instagram and TikTok as of October, or as of August of actually last year. In October, we actually soft launched our landing page. So we kind of had, before we launched our full site, we had a bit of a soft launch in October of 2021. So this was some of the early feedback we got about how people were really excited about what we were building, how like they liked the formats that were really tailored to young people, that it really spoke to their values. So we are really quite excited about where this is going. We also are really big on partnerships. So there's a lot of like local community organizations that we partner with, including, for example, BCG Scarborough, which serves youth in my hometown. There's also, we have a really big partner, a media partner called City News Toronto, which is a local news broadcaster. And we're actually launching a Green Line segment on a community show of City News's that's debuting on July 22nd. So we just like to have a lot of partners, whether educational, whether they're media, whether they're community partners. And we think that's really important because collaboration is really important, especially for independent media. The next 2 slides that I'm going to show you really quickly are really a core part of what we do at the Green Line. So I mentioned earlier that comedy and also opinion pieces and behind the scenes content can really attract a large group of people. It's something that is very shareable, bite-sized. It's really easy to consume. And so that's how we engage people who are not really familiar with the Green Line. Mm-hmm. And then at the next level, we have service journalism, which is basically like how-to guides to do things like for co-housing, for like personal finance for young people. It's also just a way to profile community members. So it's a little bit more in depth. and that's published on our Instagram and TikTok. And then a bit lower down are our original pieces of journalism that we publish on Instagram. So that's like typically what you'd see in a newspaper, 400 or 500 word articles, except it's very tailored to Instagram, which means it's very visual, it's very audio focused. There's not as much text. It's meant to kind of be, we use the slide function on Instagram for this particular format. And then lastly, we have long form pieces that are solutions oriented, that really unpack a systemic problem in Toronto. And I'll show you guys what all of this content looks like in just a second. But the biggest thing that I want to tell you about actually is this action journey or action funnel. And actually what I'm going to do now is stop sharing and actually share a different page, which is our website. So this is the website I was telling you about. And the reason why I'm sharing this website is because I want to actually show you guys what the action journey looks like in action. So remember how I told you at the very beginning of this presentation that we're really big on getting young and underserved communities to take action on the issues that matter to them. And so what we did to do that is develop an action journey. And so this is what the action journey looks like. So in a particular month, in a given month, the Green Line reports on one systemic problem facing Toronto. And to encourage Torontonians to take action on these issues, we created our action journey. So what that means is that we have 4 outputs across a month and one goes out every week. So in week 1, we publish an explainer that breaks down and clearly explains the particular problem that we're reporting on. Week 2, we have the long form feature, which is interactive, it's solutions focused, it tackles the problem that was mentioned in week 1's explainer. In week 3, we have an event where we basically convene our reporter, our feature reporter, the sources we interviewed from the long form story, and community members to chat and come up with solutions to the problem. So it's kind of like just community brainstorming. And then basically week 4, we have a solutions article that reports on this event. And then it basically curates the solutions that were surfaced from community members in week 3 at that event, and then it reflects it back to them. So it's not advocacy, but what's really cool about this process is that we basically say, hey guys, this is what you came up with, so now you should take action on these solutions. And not only that, the solutions that they come up with inform our ongoing editorial coverage. So we continue to report on the feedback and the stories and the solutions and the problems that they tell us about from that event. So I'll show you very quickly how this works with our very first story, which our very first story when we launched in April was all about living with COVID in Toronto. And so that was on the minds of a lot of people around the world. The mandates had basically been ended by our provincial government. People were really stressed out and concerned about how they can navigate the city since everybody was kind of doing their own thing, right? So we wanted to do something where we were kind of helping people work through this because there's a lot of anxiety. And so the explainer part 1, I'll show you what it looks like here. But the explainer is basically something that we publish on Instagram, and then we also publish it on the website after the fact. But I'll show you what it looks like here. So this is the explainer. So we created something called Toronto in 2 Pandemics, and it really summarized what the pandemic in this city looked like over the last 2 years. So as a high-level summary, we talked about the different waves. We talked about the confirmed cases, the number of deaths, the days of lockdown. And then we also talked about how that impacted people's mindsets and what happened, like people buying tons of groceries, hoarding toilet paper, stuff like that. We also talked about some of the conflict that arose between the sense of individual rights to whatever choice you make versus also the collective good or collective health and safety. And so we just kind of summarized the whole the entirety of the last 2 years. And also, we also introduced the long form piece here. So the long form piece actually looks at the 1918 Spanish flu. And we look at how the city of Toronto and the community members at the time, or the citizens there, tackled the Spanish flu and work together and compare it to how we're handling it today. So we ask a question at the very end, and then we also say to go to the greenline.to to check out the features. So that's what people can do here. And so you can see, you can toggle here. So if you click to part 2, it scrolls down to the feature. And it's a long form feature with really high quality visuals, a lot of data visualization. On top of that, there's also pull quotes and a lot of in-depth interviews and reporting on solutions, right? And we also looked at, again, how the pandemic was handled in 1918 so that we can kind of take lessons from them as we navigate this new normal living with COVID. Then there was the event, and this was hosted virtually, obviously, because at the time people were still nervous to go outside. But we had a really amazing panel of people who are sources in our story, but also like high-profile doctors, community organizers, frontline workers, as well as our reporter. And they talked about the issue. And then at the end, at the solutions piece, this is the article that actually covered the event, right? So if you look at the solutions piece, we have photos from the event itself, our participants, and then the most important part is that we actually have a drop-down menu of a lot of solutions, of the main major solutions that people kept coming up among our audience members or our community members who attended the event. And so these were the three ones. It was know your neighbors, safety inspections, and then direct communication. So they may seem straightforward, but they're actually quite not, because these are things that people were discussing as possible solutions that they can take control of. And then what we also do, our team compiles links so that people can take action concretely on these solutions that we curated. So for example, for Know Your Neighbors, we have a link to City of Toronto bookings where you can host or book spaces for community gatherings. For example, safety inspections, we link to a letter, a template to a letter that you can write to your member of provincial parliament. So that's just our political leaders at the provincial level. And basically, it's a great way to advocate for better safety measures, including safety inspections. And then also we have something, it's a link to communication strategies. And those are basically strategies for how to communicate directly about your boundaries as you're navigating this kind of strange time post-lockdown or living with COVID. And then lastly, we have a link to join our community, our digital community online via Discord. So we do this basically in a given month. My goal is eventually that we have these things every single month. We also did one on our music scene. We basically looked at an old kind of a music channel called Much Music, which really shaped the music scene of the city. In August, we're going to look at the sports scene in Toronto, especially for women and girls. We're also doing an issue on labor in September, especially for young people. And then we also are doing something on the Black film scene in Toronto in November. So I'm going to end by basically sharing these two last stats, and then I'll close it out for you to ask me questions. But these are stats that maybe you guys can relate to. So these are statistics about young Canadians who are Gen Zs and millennials. And so this is basically kind of going back to what I was saying at the beginning of the presentation, where a lot of young people are experiencing anxiety and depression. They also had to take on more student debt. Many of them are having a hard time finding jobs, or they lost their jobs. And on top of that, young people get their news from social media more than they get their news from established news organizations. So the thing about this is that these were huge problems that I was noticing even among my friends and also the students that I teach. And so I'm in my 30s, I'm a millennial, but also the students I teach are Gen Zs. And just anecdotally, I just saw a lot of people struggling. So I noticed that a lot of news was very negative. And I've been working in this industry since I was 14, so over 2 decades. And so a lot of news is negative. It talks about, it has headlines that focuses on the problems, and they focus on how unfixable they are. So a lot of people, including in the city, are tuning out the news, which is really bad for our democracy, because there's a lot of research that shows that people who have reliable access to local news are more likely to trust their neighbors. They're more likely to connect civically with the communities and volunteer, and they're also more likely to vote. So again, this idea of journalism as a pillar of democracy, it's really important for us to create news that actually gets young people to want to watch it or listen. And so the idea is that if you feel alienated by the news in any way, just because you're stressed out by it, or maybe because you don't see yourself reflected in the news because you're young or you're from an underserved community, you'll find a home at the Green Line. So really the idea is that we're a modern Canadian outlet, and it's also a call to action to do something about the issues that you care about and that are concerning you in your community. And so if you have any sort of questions, feel free to email me at hello@thegreenline.to. You can also visit our website, thegreenline.to, and you can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at thegreenline.to. We also have a TikTok, which has a different handle. It's greenline.to, which means that we don't have the in front of it. So you can just take a look at all our stuff. And I'd love your feedback. I'd also love you to follow us and just join the community as well. So thank you so much for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was really interesting and, very inspiring for me personally. I'm sure for a lot of young journalists as well, because I feel like what you were sharing also during your talk at the International Journalism Festival, that a lot of newsrooms are majority white and male dominated. And I feel like this is why so many of us young journalists really want to launch our own media or like our own, maybe small blog, website, whatever it is, YouTube channel, just to have your voice heard, because it's really hard to make it out there and like to be able to be heard. So what you're doing is really inspiring, even though our magazine is based in Prague, Czech Republic. That's so far away from Toronto. But I feel like that's the thing with globalization, that we are all struggling with the same issues. We're all realizing that we're going through the same problems. And what you said about anxiety and depression, I know personally that mental health is so important. And it is true that our generation, I'm a millennial, and Gen Zers, they are going through so much more than I feel like boomers.
Yeah,
And I don't know
totally.
why. I really don't know. I actually had this conversation with someone who was like 10 years older than me. Like, why are we so depressed, like my generation? And I have no idea. I feel like because we wake up and we go to the, social media to see what's going on there. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I definitely like I also think it's not just social media, though I definitely think that's been a problem. Like I just want to quickly comment on that because I think it's so important. I actually don't use social media a lot. I only use it for work personally. I step away. Like on my Instagram, I post like honestly once a year and only for big things, because I honestly feel like me focusing on my immediate community and my family and my loved ones and just paying attention to their opinions rather than the opinions of a lot of people who don't know me feels a lot safer and comfortable. I also think I think this whole desire to, this like driven kind of environment is not good, because it kind of forces people to be more focused on other people's opinions than their opinion of themselves. But the other thing is, I will also think we are going through a lot, like a climate crisis is I know Gen Zs in particular, because they're younger than us and they have to basically deal with the brunt of this. Like they are tasked with fixing the problem or addressing it when so many older generations didn't really care to pay attention. So I can see why people are dealing with so much anxiety and depression. But I also want to say that I love what you said about globalization and just connecting with youth around the world. I found it so cool for you. Like when you came up to me in Perugia and you're like, oh, I'm from Prague. I felt so I was really excited, because I felt really touched that, something that I did over here specifically for, young people in Toronto could resonate so much with young people in an entirely different city really far away in Europe. And that is really motivating to me, because then we can share our knowledge and also just help each other out with the kind of the problems that we're dealing with, which are quite similar in our own communities, so.
Yeah, no, I think it's also because a little bit about me is that, I'm half Azerbaijani, half Kazakh. So I grew up in a mixed family and speaking three languages, all together. And then I moved here when I was 19 to Prague. And then, this completely different language, which I still didn't learn, by the way, Czech language, I still don't speak it. So it's that, maybe that's why I related so much to that, because this is something I'm still trying to figure out. So thank you so much for that, for what you're doing. I really believe that our generation and future generations will really tackle this problem, this issue, racism that we're experiencing, and people are still uncomfortable talking about it. And it's it is there. Just because you don't want to talk about it, it's not going anywhere. And I feel like for visible minorities or people of color, for example, sometimes I can pass as white, depending on the context, but I don't consider myself white. So I feel like for us, these issues, we feel them so much more because they're in our face. When I know my white friends, for example, they don't notice these things. So maybe that's why, that's so important for people of color to be out there creating media, to give voice to other people of color. So
yeah, absolutely. And I just want to comment on that when we talked earlier about entrepreneurship and how there isn't a space for a lot of underserved people, including people of color, for example. And I find that for me, even in Canada, so Toronto's really diverse. Canada is known to be, quite multicultural, although that's, it is a simplification of what Canada is, because we definitely have a lot of problems, especially the way we treat our First Nations and Indigenous communities. But Toronto is very diverse, and yet still, if you look at the statistics, and I have the hard stats because I teach at university too, there things haven't changed very much. So in terms of the people at the very top, especially management, people who are media owners, very vast majority white, and many of whom are also men. So for me, this was kind of a radical act for me to launch my own publication. I don't come from money. I came from an under-resourced part of my city, but I also feel I'm very confident. I'm ambitious. I believe in myself. And that's one message that I really want to tell these like the young people here who are listening. I was very anxious. When I was younger, I was very not confident. Like, even if you met me 10 years ago, like 10 to 15 years ago, I'm 35 now, I was very like not sure of myself, and I felt like, okay, I have to fit into this journalism kind of environment that's not meant to me. I meant for me. I felt like really uncomfortable, and it wasn't just me. Like I used to think it was like, oh, my lack of confidence, and that was part of it, but a lot of it was that there was actual racism happening in these newsrooms. And I have a lot of stories about it, but I won't focus on that, because what ended up happening is it shaped me in a way that caused me to take more chances. So I moved to the United States after living in Canada to work as a journalist, because I felt like America was tackling more journalism about equity and justice and racial issues. So I covered the 2016 election that elected Donald Trump, and that really was like life-changing. And then I came back home, and I was determined to be able to report on race and justice and other equity issues in Canada. And over time, I realized I just started coming up against the same things in this country. So I was like, you know what? I have to do this on my own terms. I have to do this right. The only way this is going to work out and be authentic is if I, as a woman of color, launch this publication, because I come from this, right? So that's actually what motivated me. And I ended up, the process is that I started off consulting and teaching to save money to be able to launch this publication, because like I said, I don't come from money. I had to basically bootstrap. And then I started raising more money from foundations and other things to be able to basically launch like the website and other elements of the Green Line. But that's kind of what I had to do. I had to plan it out way ahead. I wasn't one of those people that had a really rich parents who could just give me like, oh, $200,000 to start my own thing. It was a risk, but it's the most fulfilling thing I've ever done in my life. So
that's actually one of the questions I was going to ask you about the funding, because, you either have rich parents, rich husband, or I don't know, somebody else, who is rich can like loan you money. What would you say, like the actual go-to advice you can give me, any other young journalist? I want to have my own media. What should I do? Where can I get the money? And also another question, how long did it take for you to save from just, teaching? You said that's how you actually were able to. How long did it take you?
So I'll answer that question first, and I'll answer the way you can generate revenue and how you can raise money. But it took me, so I left my last full-time job in 2019, and I was director of communities of this very cool, actually disruptive, community-driven news organization called The Discourse, based in Vancouver. And I left because they were actually going under. And also because I think it was time for me to kind of stretch my wings, basically. So I decided I was going to do consulting. And what happened was I announced, like, basically the fact that I was leaving on Twitter. I said, this is what I consult on. And this is really important, because I think it's part of how, if you guys want to go out and do your own media, this is what actually helped me a lot. So I was able to market myself and say, I specialize in diversity, audience engagement, and also like revenue, basically consumer revenue. So I basically positioned myself in a way at the time in 2019, not a lot of people said this about themselves. I said, as a journalist, I'm in a hybrid role. I do both editorial and business, and this is my specialization. So after that, I got a bunch of inquiries. Consultations started coming in. I started getting teaching gigs from the City University of New York, which basically amplified my profile. And from there, I started being able to save money and make a living. But initially, it took a bit of time, like maybe once I kind of left the organization, it maybe took me about 3 or 4 months. It wasn't that long. I actually got kind of lucky, but it was like 3 or 4 months. And then I started getting clients in. And during this time, I was building out my own personal website. In September of 2020, I launched my newsletter. So that was a huge way of getting my name out there, and also getting more and more consulting clients to be able to basically support myself. So starting your own thing and just putting yourself out there and being confident about your skill set is a great way to build your brand and also to get kind of money in the door in a way that's actually related to your skill set as a journalist. So over time, what ended up happening is I started in this newsletter, The Other Wave, I started announcing my intention to build a news outlet. So I said, these are the things I believe in. So now I'm going to take those beliefs and values and put them into a news outlet. So people actually saw me build this thing from the very beginning. And I don't think a ton of people took it seriously at the beginning because, a lot of people say that they're going to start something. Yeah. But I started documenting it and I was like, hey, I did this thing. And hey, I did this thing. And every time I had a big milestone, every time I had launched something on Instagram, every time I did something, I would tell my audience, and the audience started growing. And the audience was already growing from my previous, I co-founded this organization called Canadian Journalists of Color, and I was talking about the work I did there. So I kind of slowly transitioned from talking about my consulting work and my work doing equity advocacy in journalism to talking about the green line. And then over time, because it started getting more and more attention, it was easier for me to approach funders. So I initially got funding, just to answer your question, through myself. So I got money from my grandmother. I got money from, so it's family. Like my grandmother wasn't wealthy or anything, but she basically was able to give me a small, a lump sum. I had some money that I invested myself. And then Inspirit Foundation, which is a foundation in Canada, gave me a chunk of money. And they've been an amazing supporter of mine for a long time. And then also some labor organizations, but that was only specifically for a labor story that we were doing. That wasn't for the whole organization. So it wasn't a ton of money. It was mostly bootstrapping, as you can see, and then a bit of foundation funding. But because of the way I created the outlet and how much it resonated with young people, it's been really positive in terms of consumer revenue and membership that I got, because young people are saying, in underserved communities in Toronto, are saying this is something that reflects me and I haven't seen it before. So even though I just launched, we actually have really good traction already, and I'm pretty optimistic about the future. But that's how it happened. It took a while. And to answer your second part of your question in terms of how to get money, it's a combination of things. It's never just one thing. So you can do advertising, you can get corporate sponsorships, you can get foundation funding, especially if you're a nonprofit. And then you can also do membership or subscription funding. So that's when you do, for example, people pay an ongoing kind of fee to access your, articles or your events or any sort of other things that you're offering. And so that's kind of how it comes. There's no secret or magical kind of answer, but that's how I did it basically. And it's a lot of work basically. It's been a 2-year plus process that I've been doing this now.
Yeah, by the way, congratulations. I didn't want to interrupt you when you were presenting before, but that's amazing. Only 2 months. And basically it happened probably right when you went to Perugia, right? For the festival.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's amazing.
That was a crazy time because I was actually in Perugia right after the launch. So it was bang, bang, bang. But I was so lucky because I got to talk about the Green Line in Italy. So
yeah, exactly. That was a great way to promote, your media. But what about writers? Do you have freelancers? Do you have staff writers? And also, because you are a person of color and you know how important it is, do you value adding more voices that usually not heard? And basically just tell us more about that.
Yeah, so actually I think the easiest way is to show you actually my entire team. So my team is extremely diverse. So this is actually just a look at a bunch of people. So these are the main people that I work with. So I don't right now, I'm still not paying myself a salary. This is still I'm still building this out. My one main staff member who is consistent with me is Julia Lawrence, who's my social media manager, and she sometimes does audience engagement. I also work with a comedian, Danish Anwar, so he's not a journalist. And then I have a bunch of other contributors. So my contributors range from freelancers, long-form investigative writers, basically, and reporters, to fellows who are basically seasoned interns who help me from everything from news innovation. So that's a reporting position to business development to technology. So this is so all these people are still with me right now, as well as this person. So, and these are some of the former fellows that I had as well.
I see.
And you can see the team has always been extremely diverse. Yeah, extremely diverse. And that's something that's really important to me. Of course, it's it also includes other, people who are white people and men as well. And that's important to me in that, obviously you can see that it's more women and more racialized, which is really important to me in terms of my values. But at the same time, I really wanted something that was truly diverse, that was inclusive of everybody, while also still promoting the values that I believe in. So if you see down here, you'll see some of the values that we care about at the Green Line. We also talk about our funding model, partnerships, and also our press. But for me, like one of my biggest concerns, and I just want to say this really quickly, is how polarization and how, and you can see this on social media, how people, part of the reason why, going back to what we were talking about earlier, why there's so much anxiety and depression is because people are really like butting heads and judging each other.
Yeah.
And at the same time, like, although I love the younger generation's tendency to be on the side of justice and care about vulnerable communities, it's also important to remember that we're human, and that we all make mistakes, and that even like I definitely have learned, and I'm definitely imperfect, and I'm still growing and learning. And so it's important for us to actually have productive conversations where people are allowed to make mistakes, and for us to kind of talk through things in a more complex way. And that's the way where we can kind of find agreement and commonality, and where we can address a lot of this like conflict and polarization. And I think polarization is the most important issue of our time, even more than climate, for the reason that if we cannot even get along and talk to each other, how are we going to work together to address climate issues? Like, this is such a big problem that it needs everybody working together. So that's kind of where my mindset is. And the Green Line, kind of part of what we try to do is like promote that productive dialogue.
And my last question, because we're running out of time, because I could go on and on, we have an interview lined up with you in a few weeks, so I'll save all that for that. But now just my last question is, what was the hardest part about switching from journalism reporting? Because I also saw you had like manager positions, right, at Complex, and wait a minute, it was a lot of different Mashable, right?
Yes.
Fusion. That's honestly, I love Complex. Like, I don't know. I just love that culture, streetwear culture. So when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. So what was the hardest part about switching from all that to entrepreneurial, media role? Yeah.
So I would say, so I started off in legacy Canadian journalism. I worked at the newspaper Record, also the largest paper in the city or the country, which is the Toronto Star. So it's a very like old school traditional reporting. And then I moved to New York City to be news director at Complex. And then I also worked at Mashable and Fusion, like you said. And those were more digital American publications before moving back home to Canada. So it was, I wouldn't say it's a huge transition to becoming a publisher. I actually think I'm a better publisher because I was on the ground and I've done everything. I've done everything from reporting, newspaper reporting, to editing, to being an on-air reporter, to being a producer for television, to basically running a newsroom, a digital newsroom like Complex. And so all those skills help me figure out how to build a company from the ground up, right? So when you're a publisher or when you're the CEO of an organization and it's just you have to think about the editorial side, but you also have to think about the business side. So the editorial side stuff I know really well. I've been doing it since I was 14. I was in this industry professionally since I was 14. So that's 21 years now. And the business side is the stuff that I learned a lot at the Discourse and through my consulting and coaching and all the work I was doing after I left the Discourse. So it was kind of like, I loved it because it was a way for me to actually tap into my many different skill sets, because I'm just in love with journalism. I'm a huge journalism nerd, and every element of it I'm just super passionate about, although I'm moving more towards the business side. So it was actually a great way for me to do everything I loved. And that was actually something I yearned to do at other places. There's a bit of a learning curve, but I made sure to work on that before I started my news outlet. I made sure that I had a strong enough foundation of knowledge before I went out to do that. And I also have a team of great advisors and mentors who've helped me out. And so obviously I wouldn't be where I was without like all the support of like not just the community, but also like my team and also advisors. So yeah, that's the short answer.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for this webinar. I really learned a lot. I hope our viewers as well. Any maybe message for Canadian people who want to maybe write for you? Do you accept new freelancers, or maybe not only Canadian, if international as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'll just say it's in general, please definitely follow the Green Line at the Green Line TO on all social media, or Green Line TO on TikTok. And then also the website's called thegreenline.to. You can reach out to me. I'm sure my information will be given out. In terms of like contributions, we always accept basically pitches for our long form section, our issues section. So if you have a investigative story that you want to pitch, that's definitely something we're interested. We also are interested in short form pieces that are tailored to our Instagram. So if you have ideas that are more visual that you think would be great, that are focused on Toronto, I'm very open to that. So in terms of the people that we tend to accept contributions from, we like to keep it to people who are connected to the city, but that doesn't mean that international people are not allowed to contribute, because Toronto is so international. Like, most people I know here are going, like, I know people who are friends whose parents are from Hong Kong, who go back to Hong Kong. I know people who go to Pakistan every year to see their family. I know, like, Toronto is very diverse. So even if you're somebody who's based in Prague, but you're connected to Toronto because you went to school here before, or you lived here before, or you have family here, I'm still very open to that. So you can pitch me at hello@thegreenlines.to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anita. That's it for today, you guys. I hope you enjoyed watching this webinar, and I hope you learned a lot about starting your own media business. Basically, you just need to gather as much experience as possible, because being a media entrepreneur is not an easy task. And thank you so much, guys, for watching. Don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to Youth Time channel. And we'll see you next month. Bye.